Welcome, everyone. I'm Jesse Raisler, the moderator for this discussion. We'll be talking about the beautiful film, They Came From All Over. And we've got a great roundtable of guests here today, the filmmaker and everybody behind the project. So we'd love to start with just some introductions. If, Rika, you don't mind introducing yourself and passing it along.
Hi, I'm Rika Zetapchi. I'm the director of They Came From All Over.
Hi, I'm Natasha Wellesley. I'm executive producer on the project and work at Ventureland. Ventureland is the creative studio that was behind this project in association with Meta. So perfect segue, Sarissa.
I'm Sarissa Tanner. I was the producer for Meta on the project. And I'll pass it to Lyle.
I'm Lyle Schemmer. I was the creative director and one of the EPs on this film.
Fantastic. I think that's everybody. Awesome. Well, for those who hopefully you've seen the film. If you haven't, I've seen this film described as a love letter to small businesses everywhere, which I absolutely agree. And I would add, I found it a love letter to small towns everywhere also. Being in Malvern, Iowa. I'm from a small town. I've come back to live in a small town now, so I love that. There was such care, respect to the residents, care in how it was photographed. But beyond that, it was just a moving film. It stirred the filmmaker in me also because the craft of it is really so thoughtfully applied and cinematically captured. Both of which is why I'm sure this film is having such a wonderful life, both at film festivals and online. With I saw Holly Shorts Film Fest, a win at Independent Shorts Awards, and a coveted Vimeo staff pick, which is a big deal for a lot of us in the industry. So congratulations to all of you on the beautiful life it's having. So I'm excited to talk about this film, but before we do, it'd be great to understand just a little bit about how this film fits into the storytelling efforts at Meta. I'd love to get into the origins of this project in particular, but can you help us understand just what the commitment to storytelling is, what kinds of stories you're telling?
I think that Meta is a company that has several different apps that are truly about communication and bringing people together. So we are a tool that facilitates community and communication, like all of the apps and services do that. So as a company, it's a very vast ecosystem of content that the company is producing yearly. What's really interesting is that a lot of the content is meant to perform well on the apps, which means short form content. So that's where a lot of our energy goes. And then you have things that are meant for a little bit longer attention span, a little bit longer medium. And those are kind of made weekly, and they're like authentic stories of what's happening across Instagram, Facebook, WhatsApp, to show the power of the platforms that we're building. And then within that, there's a couple of films a year that are kind of marquee, much deeper, very highly crafted, working with some of the best filmmakers and thinkers in the industry. Which I think this film is emblematic of, to take some time to really try to create something that is going to hopefully have a moment get into the bloodstream of culture, to really participate in that conversation in a way that doesn't feel like marketing. That's sort of kind of what we were trying to do with this film. And I think there's this film from Meta, and there's also another film at Brand Storytelling this year from WhatsApp. They both kind of are doing that, and sort of the company getting out of the way, letting the filmmaker tell this story in their voice through their lens. Of course, we're involved heavily, but we really try to get out of the way, right? She was great at guiding us in that sense. But that there's sort of their key moments, and they're precious moments as a filmmaker and producer, where you have a great story, you have the backing, which means the resources from your company to do them, and you have great partners. It's like a dream project, and there's only a few of those a year.
I love that.
I would also add that I think that the idea of authenticity
That's exactly.
It's a very important idea at Meta. It's always been very important to the brand. people having expressing their voices, giving voice to people, giving voice to communities of people. So like what I've seen from sort of through like the marketing lens, there's always been a very heavy emphasis on authentic storytelling, looking back at how the platform was used, looking back at how it transformed people, how it provided them opportunities, etc. So we were always sort of like geared toward some form of documentary storytelling one way or another. And I think that sort of made it easier for our internal teams to embrace this particular project.
Absolutely. I'm sure there are so many stories that you come across that would lend themselves to this type of film, which begs another follow-up is like, how do you, I'd love to know more about your research in casting and story finding. And then also like when you find a story like this one, is it the story that drives like, okay, this is a story that we're going to invest in and make one of those marquee films? Or like, how are you deciding which of those gets that kind of treatment? So I guess kind of a two-parter there.
Well, I'll say that one of our stakeholders, Kira McCoy, who was actually credited as one of the EPs of this film as well, she was her sort of remit within our team was advocacy marketing, small business advocacy. So she knew Tom Mulholland, she knew about the Meta Boost Leaders Network, she knew the story, and she basically came to us and said, "I have this amazing story to tell." And so that sort of became like the starting point. Yeah, this sounds like a great story. And then, Sarissa said to me, given her experience as a documentary filmmaker, said, the thing that you have to worry about is that you go into a project thinking that this is the story you're going to tell, but you don't know what you're going to find in the process, or what the edit will reveal. So I think that like in some ways we tell Tom's story in a really great way, but it actually brought in a lot of other inputs that maybe we weren't expecting. And that owes obviously to Rika and the level of questions and what she could sort of like tease out from the cast.
That's great. Was there a moment ever where, as you were learning about Tom's story and what that was, where you said, okay, this seems special or unique, or we want to focus on a small business, that made you go, okay, let's bring in someone like Reka to tell this story in more of an elevated sense than the content you're producing more regularly, for example?
Well, when Kira brought this opportunity to us, I mean, I think it was very clear that this was certainly the story to tell. We didn't know what we were going to discover as we sort of pulled the thread on it. But I think that from the get-go we knew it was going to be Tom, and we were also sort of aware that the typical approaches toward marketing the Meta Boost Leaders Network were kind of losing potency. There had been on-platform advertising. There had been a lot of direct response on-platform marketing around bringing people in, and the idea was, what if we try something completely different? And that's what we ended up with in the best possible way.
I think this film process, the process of making it, was really textbook, and that's theory that when you're making a documentary or you're making any film or creative endeavor, you're making it, in this case, 3 times. You have an idea going into it, then you make it in the field, what you learn there, and then you're remaking it in the edit. And each time it evolved in Rika's hands and through our collaboration. And I think that we kind of always knew Tom had an incredibly compelling and dramatic story, and he was a great character. We learned in the field sort of the greater stakes for the town of what it meant for a town that loses its only grocery store. And that really opened up, for me at least anyway, once we were in the film, and then seeing it once we were in the field, and then seeing it in the edit, like how do we bring that to life, and how do we give it stakes and all those sorts of things. So I felt like that was one of the things that came out of conversation of an interview with him kind of in the field, or maybe I'm misremembering, but that's sort of where I got that from. We sort of had a huddle after an interview, and we're like, look, this is a really interesting piece of information, and it really gives some context that's really important to the role of the small business in the town.
Once the whole sort of food desert idea had sort of been teased out, I think that was pivotal in just showing sort of like what a large canvas the story actually was. And it wasn't really just about Tom losing his grocery store, and then it's those are the stakes I think that you're referring to, Sarissa. And what the impact will be on all the other folks in that community.
And that it was happening throughout sort of rural America. Yeah.
I'm glad you raised that, Sarissa. That's one of the things I love most about making documentaries is you do really get to make it 3 times. And I think it gives us a great framework to talk about process here and how you collaborated. Let's start with that first time, the pre-production, getting to know Tom. I'm curious, how did you start to work with Rika? And Rika, I'm curious to hear how you approach getting to know Tom. I mean, there's a million ways different filmmakers go about this. Did you talk much in advance of going out? Like, how much do you like to get to know a subject before you show up with cameras, essentially?
I like to know him just enough. Definitely. I mean, I think from the get, speaking from a director's perspective, you get briefs all the time. And sometimes there's a lot of information in the briefs that really helps inform whether or not you want to work on the project. And sometimes there isn't that much. In this case, when I received the brief and initial communications from Ventureland, it was, for me, kind of a slam dunk as far as Tom's story goes. Because just on paper alone, this idea of someone who didn't just own a small business, but it was his entire life, and it was the lifeline for the town itself. For me, already provided enough of a platform, enough of a sort of foundation to say, okay, wonderful. Like, we have a dramatic story here, and we also have a sort of hero character at the center of it, who is really loved by his community, and also who really has organically used Facebook as a means to connect with not just his immediate community around him, but an online community that has helped supported him and lifted him up. And I think the thing I'm always trying to suss out when I receive these briefs is, okay, wonderful, this is what the brand wants to do, but does it feel like there's an organic tie-in here to the brand, right? Does it feel like I have to get in there and, like, can I be a documentary filmmaker here, or do I have to manipulate, And for me, from the get-go, I immediately felt like, oh, there's a wonderful opportunity here to be a documentary filmmaker, to do what I do best, to get curious, because I don't have that sort of mandate hanging over my head where I feel like I have to answer to that, or at least spend a lot of my mental energy answering to that. And initial conversations with Lyle and Sarissa were amazing. I mean, I found them to be so wonderful and lovely and collaborative, and I think we aligned on a lot of things. And Lyle, I remember one of our earliest communications, you said something about Top Gun. You said, you touch on that before I forget? I remember you said Top Gun, and I was like, what is the connection to Top Gun here? But it was profound, and I feel like it sort of something clicked.
Yeah, so the Top Gun reference was that in a weird way, Top Gun was a propaganda film to get people to join the US Navy, because after the film came out, enrollment spiked up, right? Like, people were like, I want to be like Goose and Maverick. Well, I want to be just like Maverick, I suppose, not Goose. But the fact is that it sort of portrayed being a naval aviator in a really compelling, sexy way that people were just excited about. And the thinking for us was, could we tell an organic story about Tom Mulholland and how he used Facebook and he used the community tools to connect him to these other business owners who lifted him up after he lost his store? And could people just see that story without it feeling like an ad, or without people being made to feel that we were selling them something? They're just engaging emotionally in this man's story. Could they then go off and think, I want to be part of this, And I think that was like the sort of like Top Gun hypothesis that I sort of gave to Rika.
I remember Lyle saying that, and I was like, I want to work with him. This is going to be an absolute joy. Um, but to now answer your question, Jesse, yeah, I think from the get-go, I already felt disarmed, that I didn't have that sort of that brand thing hanging over my head, that I could just be curious and approach it as I do with all of my films. And so, I started conversations with Tom as soon as we were getting ready to go. Just a couple calls, couple heart to hearts. And I think for me, what's most important is not sort of figuring out every detail beforehand. For me, it's like I like to continue to be curious even throughout the interview process. I like discovering new things throughout the interview process as well, like on the day. So I'm not really trying to do all of that beforehand. What I'm really trying to do is build trust. What I'm really trying to do is just be another human being who is curious about someone's story, and build that trust so that I can really disarm the subject, and they can feel safe in my hands, right? And in the hands of like Meta, right? Because as the director here, I'm representing Ventureland, I'm representing Meta, and so it's really very important for me that we have this really comfortable exchange with the subject, and that I have the ability, I have enough trust gained with the subject that I have the ability to push when I need to as a director, push to go deeper down certain rabbit holes. And a lot of times, if you haven't established that trust, you kind of you hit a wall, and the film suffers, the storytelling suffers. So that's really my process, and it's my favorite part of the process. It is, because I love people, I love stories, I'm curious, and it's always fun doing that.
I'll just add to that and say that, Sarissa, mainly Sarissa, I think, had put together this incredible director search. And we did so much footwork trying to figure out who was going to be the best director. Because one of the things that I really believed in was that I didn't want to have to hover or micromanage my director. I wanted somebody that I knew who could treat the story with absolute sensitivity, total finesse, total artistry, and I wouldn't have to be like looking over the shoulder the way that typically, my experience has been. I've made lots of TV commercials, and that's much more sort of like collaborative between a creative director and the film director. Typically, like I'm sitting next to the camera, I'm like watching every take, and I wanted someone that was going to work their magic as a storyteller that I could sort of be distant from and just absolutely trust 100%. And in order to get that, to find Rika, which I feel was like sort of a triumph of our director's search and the work that Sarissa put in. It was just like once we knew who the right person was, I just felt like I could step away and sort of give over my trust to Rika and to Ventureland.
That's lovely to hear. I'm curious what that, well, I guess a two-parter too, having been in that world as well and seeing like, okay, ads are very storyboarded, and someone who's doing a documentary for the first time might want to see some sort of framework. I'm curious how comfortable everyone was. Well, first of all, I guess for Rika, like how much of it, was there much of a story outline going into it? Or was it like, go find it, find out what's there? You knew enough already, you could just trust her to do it. Like, what does that look like in the field once the filmmaking is actually happening, that collaboration?
Well, that's not going to happen with me. You're not getting storyboards with my documentaries.
I'm the same.
Yeah. I think a lot of it too is, and Lyle, I think Lyle and Sarissa, this question's mostly for you, but I'm going to jump in really quick. I think a lot of it too is the dance that you do with the client as well, right? The dance that you do in the beginning and establishing trust with them. It's also establishing a dynamic where you are, as a storyteller, you're saying, hey, I need you to trust me. This is how I work, and this is why I work this way. I'm not doing it out of ego. This is just the process. And this is why the films turn out so sensitive and artistic and whatever. But it's a little bit of that dance of communicating your needs as the director. And I think from the get-go, we were able to very organically establish that dynamic. Where I think in a lot of our communications, I was very clear, like, this is my process, and And I'm not interested in prescripting anything from the get-go, and if there are needs that you have, please share them. And they will be absolutely 100% thoughtfully considered, and I will sit and ruminate on them. But like, it was not a situation where it was like, oh, I'm going to, write out this detailed outline and we're going to know every beat of the story. Because I just think that kills magic. It absolutely kills magic.
Yeah, we had like, I mean, look, the fact is that I was 100% committed to you and just knew, like, I believed in your artistry. And that gave me the confidence that, like, you can be on a very, very long leash and I'm not going to worry. I think that we had a little back and forth over like a beat sheet, like, which was like a page and a half, which I think was also very loose. And actually, I think some of the back and forth wasn't even driven by me personally. It was some of my stakeholders were worried about things that were going to be covered or not covered or whatever. But I think it just speaks to the importance of preparation. And part of the preparation is making sure you bring somebody on board that you have absolute faith in. And that gives you the ability to sort of exhale and trust.
I think just to get like really brass tacks for the people watching, being like, well, what did they, how, they knew nothing. We did. We to borrow from Rika, we knew just enough. We had scenes, and each, it was a page and a half, with, I don't know, maybe 7 scenes, I think, couple sentences each, what was going to be happening there in a verite sense, and what we hoped information wise would be revealed, or what the emotional point of it would be. So we had a blueprint of what was in Rika's head that we could follow along with, and that we could share with our stakeholders to make sure they're comfortable with and stuff like that. So there was just enough information, basically.
And I will jump in too, because a lot of this film was shot on 35 millimeter film, which, I mean, is my favorite part of of the project. And that was another thing from the get-go. Part of that sort of trust building process of working with Meta was, that was a big part of my creative vision for the project was, 35 millimeter film feels so perfect for this small town. I want every frame to feel like a painting in some way, and I want to go for stillness and quaintness, and it was absolutely the right choice. I believe I always felt it was, and I think it really does help elevate the film in a lot of ways, not just aesthetically, but also in terms of how you work and how you think about the storytelling. And so in my preparation, of course, I'm making a documentary, right? So spontaneity is very important. Like I said before, like sort of letting the magic happen is very important. But there's sort of this tension, this built-in tension right from the get-go when you're like, okay, great, now I'm making a documentary on film.
Absolutely.
Documentary and film don't always go together, and brand and documentary don't always go together. They're sort of all contradictions, right? Which is my favorite place to be, because it always provides a challenge.
And brand and 35 millimeter,
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that was one of my favorite parts of your treatment, actually, because I could just sort of see how that is. And I know, so I'd worked with so many directors who were trying to fake the feeling of emulsion through like anamorphic lenses and things. And I'd been shooting all these things on red cameras for quite a long time. And the idea of actually getting to work with real film, I wanted to hear you say, check the gate,
I did not lean into that cliche, Lyle. No, but there's something about the workflow that I love working on film, and I shot another documentary before this on 16 millimeter film. I think, for one, that's the amazing privilege of being a storyteller and getting to work with brands, but also in this sort of niche space, right? Where, like Sarissa said, Meta's only producing like 2 of these types of projects a year. I feel so fortunate to be able to work on these types of projects because there's so much more, it's so much more fulfilling for the director, You get to put so much more of your stamp on the projects. You work with wonderful creatives that truly feel like collaborators, but also have so much trust and faith in you as and your vision. So it's always so exciting for me. I seek a challenge in these situations. But the 35 millimeter, as far as the workflow goes, it forces you to slow down. And the pace of the town is slow. The pace of Tom's life is slow. It was interrupted by this awful tragedy of the fire and losing the grocery store that didn't just affect him, but had these terrible implications for the rest of the town and a big part of the region. So film just felt really right. And as far as the workflow goes, like, I love being in a situation where I have a limited amount of resources to work with, and I have to be really conscientious about when we're rolling camera. And I think it also works in sort of a branded situation as well, because I'm not going out and shooting a verite doc aimlessly until I find my story. I have 7 days, or however many days we've budgeted for. So I have to, allow room for that discovery, but I also have to have that sort of framework in my head beforehand, that outline in my head beforehand. And a lot of it, I think, comes down to working with a cinematographer that you have a lot of trust in as well. And having the ability to do your best work in the moment on the fly, where you're working with the cinematographer to continue editing and crafting your story, but in a visual way now, right? Like, not just in terms of story and narrative beats, but how can you visually craft these scenes and take it to the next level, and do it in a way that's thoughtful, because you can only roll a camera for so long.
That's one of the things that really struck me, is how much the form and the craft seemed to be guided by the subject itself. And so I could feel that you adapting the pace of the place and Tom in the filmmaking, and it's beautifully done. And the fact that you got this, I don't think I've heard of this trifecta before, of a brand, a documentary, and 35 millimeters. So that's pretty incredible.
And a Woody Guthrie track.
Right.
And Woody Guthrie. Magic.
Oh my God, absolutely. Well, I'd love to hear a little bit about, so you mentioned, like, when you're shooting on film, it changes the dynamic. Working with real people is so different than working with actors in commercials, for example. When you go from digital to film, I imagine, your crew's going to need to get a little bit bigger. I'd love to hear, just as an example, like, how you're setting up these scenes when you're, in these diners or the library, and working with these people who have probably never been in front of a camera, certainly not like that. Like, how are you setting things up? It's so cinematic, and yet everybody feels at ease. Do you want to talk a little bit about your approach there?
Well, the crew doesn't get bigger. I'm very, very protective over that. I really like to keep a scrappy crew. I really love to keep it intimate, even if we're shooting on film. Maybe, we have one extra person or something on the camera team, but no, I love to keep it scrappy. And I'll also, I love to bring in Steadicam and, find scrappy ways that, like, one of my favorite shots in the film is this aerial shot looking down on the cemetery, at the end, towards the end of the film, when Tom is walking up to his father's gravestone. And I absolutely love that shot. It looks high budget. The scale is large, but it's not. I mean, we were on a cherry picker. We adopted this visual language that felt very, like, it could increase the scale of the production in the world while still remaining quaint, right? And still, like, keeping that visual language top of mind. So I love to just, find ways that we can continue to be scrappy, even though we have a wonderful amount of resources at our disposal. I like for those resources to go on the screen. I like for those resources to go into having more time on set to work with our subjects, and to do really fun stuff.
I love that. And I feel a smaller crew allows people to be themselves and not become, kind of shocked at the mechanics of a large film set too. So you get more genuine, natural discussions. So that's great to hear. So now let's say you've got maybe your first edit. I'd love to hear what were the reactions to what you were seeing? And then how did you decide where this film would live? Like, was that predetermined, or did you look at things and then decide where the film would go? Curious to hear how that all wrapped up and came together.
One of the wonderful elements of working with Ventureland, and there are numerous, was they thought holistically about the film. They were they vetted us as much as we vetted Rika to see whether this was, when we approached them, just in that initial conversation with one of the executive producers that I had. It was a two-way conversation. It was, but and they were, and Natasha as EP, along with Rika, they were our guides throughout the whole process, and were really helpful in articulating how to navigate different challenges we would encounter, or how to even sell different ideas internally within our own teams. And one of the other things that was so great and generous about working with Ventureland was they really thought holistically about the life of the film. And they are experts in bringing films to the world. And that's not something we know or do on a daily basis. So it was really through partnership with them that they kind of, here are the options, here's the strategy, this is where we think we can thrive and how we can go about doing that. And so Natasha was instrumental in sort of helping us think through a film strategy, a festival strategy. Also, like, do we need a trailer? Do we need shorter pieces to do something more hard hitting? Those sorts of things. And where does the film live within an ecosystem? So it was really through Ventureland's leadership that we figured all that out.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Teresa. But yeah, no, it really is something that I think brands come to us with. Sometimes they have a pre-existing idea of what they want to do, or a defined idea, but really it's because of our sort of unprecedented approach of working with brands to really sort of help amplify their projects, and because the company is in the originals world but also does branded entertainment. So we really work along across podcasts and documentaries and film and TV, but when it comes to branded entertainment, we're really looking at it from a holistic point of view as to what are all the other different marketing materials that we can create in order to drive awareness to go watch the film. So it's not necessarily about selling a product or an item, but really it's about like getting people to actually engage with the content and to be entertained by it, because ultimately I think audiences know when they're being sold to, and in this instance it really wasn't something that Meta came to us and said, okay, we really want to just drive memberships to BLN. That wasn't the goal for this, sort of obviously sort of it will inherently do that, but it wasn't like the primary goal for this was to really entertain audiences. So I think from the get-go the trust was already established with Meta in terms of being able to really understand what the sort of content arena was and what we needed to create in order to get people to sort of create to like engage with it. So we came up with a real strategy. We involved our PR department, Meta's PR department. We put together as a whole PR plan, a film festival approach, even how we premiered it and where we premiered it, and what the first showing was actually in Iowa, and the way that sort of we really sort of stuck true to the fact that this was an Iowa story and we really wanted it to launch there, and for the community, and knowing how important community was to engage with the film first and foremost, and then take it out to all the different film festivals. So there was a real sort of like strategy behind that.
I think one thing that was really interesting in terms of like the actual editing of the film too, that Rika was speaking of her as a guide to people who hadn't been through this process before, but she was really clear with us about, well, one of the great debates in the whole process, we didn't know per se, was how to bring meta into the film, how it should manifest within the film itself. How would we be too heavy-handed and potentially lose audiences if we did something that didn't feel authentic or felt like too much and it started to feel like marketing, that we were pushing something. And one of the things that I think Rika, as sort of this just had the vision was, we could have really clear conversations around like, I feel like this is the line. If we do this, X is going to happen, meaning it'll start to feel like marketing and we will not be considered potentially by certain festivals. Like these are the trade-offs. We've had very clear, a lot of it was creative conversations, but like also, very clear about like sort of the implications for the life of the film, and where she, as an artist and somebody who's been in this position before, felt like that she was very clear about where she thought that line was, which was very, very helpful.
I'm reminded of when we were doing the panel in New York, and we're talking about this very question. And I think there's this moment in the film when Renee says, "Yeah, I went straight to Facebook Messenger and started talking to Tom," and like the fact that she wasn't coached to say Facebook Messenger, and I just like it always just sort of like stuck out to me because it almost sounded like it was too coached,
like a product placement,
to call it out to call it out by name like that. Sort of like I was just like, is that the thing where the audience starts to feel that you've tricked them, And, I mean, fortunately, I mean, there's nothing you could do about it. She said it. It was a real statement. It was totally authentic. But there was one, like every time I've watched any edit of the film, that line I always think about the conversations that we've had around this, around where is that line that you don't want to cross.
I just like, this is why I loved working with Lyle and Sarissa as well. They were so aware of that, they were so self-aware when it came to that question of like, what is the line? Because I think that line is what makes or breaks these projects. It really does. You can do everything right, and then you can just push it a little too far, and you lose your audience, because it's always about believability, right? I'm always asking myself whenever I'm editing an interview, you shoot a 3-hour interview, but only 10 minutes of it or something makes it in the film, right? So you're editing something down to its like core, so that you can be focused, but you're also asking yourself throughout that editing process, do I believe the story that we're hearing? And that also extends to this question of what is the line when it comes to marketing? Do I believe that this is something that organically exists within this world, or does it feel like, Meta HQ came in and made the director put something in that she didn't want to?
Well, I think that's beautiful wisdom to wrap up on, actually. Knowing where that line is, and I think having discussions about it early, but then also trusting your gut in the edit to go, we don't want to push this too far. As we wrap up, any other parting words of wisdom, maybe for other brands who are looking to make a film, and we can say film here since we're 35 millimeter?
I'll just say, do the due diligence, find an artist that you trust and let them do their thing. I think that's how you get good work.
It's so true. I love what I do when I get to work with partners like Lyle and Sarissa and Natasha. Like I really, I do my best work, and it's all about just starting with the trust. Brands, trust your creatives, trust your directors, trust the people you hire.
Trust is a lovely sentiment to end on. Well, thank you all so much for being here. We'll be excited to see whatever the next 35 millimeter outing is from you, Rika, or from Meta as well. Keep making the beautiful films, and thanks for sharing your process with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.